Skull and Bones is not doing very well, Josh Brown.
It's not, but does this surprise anyone?
No. Skull and Bones apparently is underperforming, according to Insider Gaming's Tom Henderson. The game has apparently 850,000 players, which sounds like it's a lot, but that apparently includes people who signed up for the free trial. The full numbers aren't out yet, and Insider Gaming notes that they won't know them until May. But still, this is the game that was described as a quadruple A game by CEO Yves Guillemot. They charged a premium price point of £70/$70, and overall, it seems like it is underperforming. Internally as well, Insider Gaming had a report with a quote from an Ubisoft employee saying that I think we all knew this was a $30 to $40 game at best, but it's not in our control to determine those things. Another quote from Insider Gaming said, $200 million in a decade-long development, a sum that the company doesn't expect to make back. The game's development saw thousands of developers working on the game across 11 different studios, which saw countless changes in creative direction and constant internal delays. It's worth throwing into this pile that the game had to be made due to a contractual agreement with the government of Singapore. Another recent Kotaku report noted, and this is in present tense because it's from last year, another former developer said Ubisoft has bet big on Skull and Bones and is determined to ship it one way or another. In part, that's because live service games have become an increasingly important and lucrative part of Ubisoft's portfolio. 3 sources told Kotaku that a deal with the Singapore government requires the game. In addition to hiring a certain number of people at its Singapore studio in exchange for generous subsidies, Ubisoft Singapore must also launch original brand new IPs in the next few years. There's a little bit more to the more current reports here, but are any of us surprised by this?
No, I don't think even Ubisoft is surprised. Like, they cannot have been looking at the budget for this game, the resources they've pumped into it, the fan response online, if you could even call the players of this game fans of it, and thought they were going to make any kind of splash. I honestly thought that them describing it as a quadruple A game was genuinely a bit insulting. And if this news story was just big game comes out and gets nearly 1 million players, I don't even think that would be necessarily newsworthy. I think it's within the context of Skull and Bones. It's within the context of how it's been marketed as this lavish production. And it certainly is in terms of the money that's being pumped into it, but does the end result reflect it? I don't think so, and I've only looked at the game, you know what I mean, in terms of its visual style, in terms of what you're actually doing in it compared to something like Assassin's Creed Black Flag from a decade ago. I was watching the Eurogamer video on it last night, which is incredible, by the way, that's looking into just how dated it looks. And I think they even said, you could describe this as quadruple A in terms of the amount of time that's been invested, the amount of effort that's gone into it, but just looking at it from a technical perspective, this is not on the level of even other Ubisoft titles, right? Well,
the idea of the quadruple A game is such a weird, stupid thing. It was mentioned when the Perfect Dark reboot first came out. And when that was first announced, the idea of the world's first quadruple A game. And then Yves Guillemot is the guy that mentioned it in regards to Sea of Thieves. That's because it so is Sea of Thieves. Skull and Bones mentioned it then. I think it was almost like something he didn't mean to say or whatever, because it's a ... thing. He starts to say, oh, it's a triple A game. It's a quadruple A game. And I think maybe that did reflect the amount of time that it's been in development. Insider Gaming's new report does say that players seem fairly engaged. The average player plays between 3 to 4 hours a day. And they say, however, whether or not that will change once the free trial expires or if it will convert players into full purchases remains to be seen. The main thing that I see being shared is that you can't do actual melee combat. There's no swashbuckling stuff. You can't actually be a pirate. You can be a pirate ship. You can be a pirate in regards to designing your character and walking around. But I think a lot of us, and I'm going back 11 years, 2013 for Black Flag, a lot of us had that idea of, if you would skull someone else's ship, you swing in on the rope and you fight that other player, and that would be Skull and Bones. I mean, they've been mentioning it for the last 6-ish years now, but it's been in development for a long time. And even the ship mechanics that are here started in Assassin's Creed 3. Like, it's been around for a long time. But to not capitalize on the most obvious gameplay mechanic there is a big missed opportunity, at least to someone like me who would have given this a shot if there was something to it other than just the stock ship combat that's been there before. All the gameplay that seems to be doing the rounds, if it's not pointing out the flaws, is just saying that what is there is just repeating. You're just looking for crafting mechanics. You're pulling up next to some trees to harvest some trees, and you're trying to take on various players and stuff. But it's nowhere near Sea of Thieves, which itself had quite a rough launch anyway, or to get to the point where it was worth playing outright. And then what is there is just very, very repetitive anyway.
I'm fascinated to know if we ever see the other versions of this game, because this can't be the game that was in production 10 years ago or however many years ago it was. Like, this bare bones experience. Like, why would it have taken this long to get this out? I know, it's still ambitious in certain ways, especially making it a live service and having all of these other players in the same world. But yeah, like you said, it's already based off a model that already existed over a decade ago that people liked. But if that's all there is, like, where are the innovations? Where is the money gone? Where's the time gone? Like, how many people were working on this? How many versions of this have been made? Because even looking at the finished gameplay, comparing it to even trailers from a couple of years ago, it's like night and day in terms of the presentation and what they were maybe hoping to achieve and what they have achieved. I do think, again, I'm not even necessarily commenting on the game's quality. What there might be good. I'm just talking about, like, what have they shipped? Very good pun, I thought. And where does it fall within the context of Ubisoft? Because you can say, like, they didn't market it very well. They haven't given it a big push. They also haven't pushed any of their recent games. Like, they didn't push Avatar, which was surprisingly really good. They're not even really giving that much of a push to Star Wars Outlaws, is it called?
Yeah,
and we had
world.
that big sort of reveal trailer, but that's apparently coming sooner rather than later. And it's like, that should be the one that you're really pushing and marketing. Like, why do they just not have faith in their own games is my question at this moment in time. I mean, I know why they don't in the case of Skull and Bones, but like, it's more than just this one title. It's a problem with Ubisoft as a company, I feel, in the confidence in their own product.
It's their pivot towards the live service stuff. Like, the Insider Gaming report mentions that obviously some of the games that are coming up are the mobile version of The Division. They've got a Far Cry game that's coming out, which we have covered before. It's based on the Netflix show, or it seems to be. I still feel like we've got so many companies reacting to the live service stuff. You've got so many companies reacting to player numbers across the pandemic. How do we monetize that increased growth of people playing? Obviously, the reality of the pandemic starting to end or fizzling out or whatever the hell you want to call the state we're in isn't the same as it was, and a lot less people play games, but the plans that were in motion are still there. There's also the big budget AAA side of things where that whole idea of spending $300 million on a game is such a rarity at this point, and trying to have more monetizable avenues to fund those games over time. It's just weird though, like you said, it's not like you look at this and go, this is a pristine game. This is something that is dripping with, like, quality and opulence and whatever. It looks like exactly what we thought a Assassin's Creed Black Flag multiplayer game would have been 11 years ago. And it largely seems to play the same as well.
I wonder, man, if they launched Skull and Bones free to play or heavily discounted to $30 and $40 and still had the microtransactions in and whatnot, and were relying on them for the revenue, like, would people have wanted to jump in? I'd think $70 at this moment in time is just a ridiculous asking price for games as ropey as this. Look at the releases so far this year. We've had Suicide Squad, we've had Skull and Bones, we've had these big AAA or quadruple A $70 games kind of crash and burn. And then on the other hand, we've had something like Helldivers, $40. That's just not only selling well, it's increasing in sales week on week, which is so rare for companies to do. Like, I just feel like that $70 price point for things that aren't a guaranteed 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 is just, it's killing more games than saving games. Like, yeah, you might get a little bit more revenue, but you also need to convince people way more than the previous price point or even lower.
Yeah, man. And this year in particular, like you said, like Palworld, I think was 25.
Right,
Like, that wasn't a free game either. But like, those are the two biggest success stories of the year. Helldivers is ludicrous. That game is incredible. It deserves all the plaudits. It deserves all the player numbers and everything. But having such a brazen comparison twice in a row now, Palworld to Suicide Squad, Helldivers to Skull and Bones, either the market rejects the £70 price point outright, which you can argue that. Like, there are cases where something like Spider-Man will still sell well, but there is that argument that maybe it would have sold even better if it was $60 or £60. And that whole conversation around Spider-Man in particular about did it feel like it was a premium quality product all the way through the same way as the 2018 one, or whatever. It's just that you're seeing an industry try to recoup the funds, and like certain projects that go on for way too long. Obviously, in this case, we have the Singapore stuff where it's like they had a governmental contract where it's like we need to ship something, which I think is why the game itself doesn't have that much to it. Again, I'm being super regressive. I would love more devs to weigh in the comments, get in touch, whatever. But that idea of this game's going to ship anyway, so let's focus on our other projects. Where Ubisoft turned a lot of games around, including in the entire time that this game's been in development, the whole new version of Assassin's Creed from Origins all the way through to Valhalla and all the DLC packs and everything. I'd imagine that is where most of the focus was across the last few years. And then you get back to this project, you dig it up and you sort of zap it a bit and go, right, okay, let's ship this thing anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, in like that Kotaku article reported on years ago, like this thing had to ship in some form, or at least something new from Ubisoft Singapore had to ship at some point. It reminds me of what they do in the film industry with something like, I think it's called Hellraiser Bloodline, one of the old Hellraiser movies, or the Hulu one, something like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, where you have these agreements, you might have a license to a franchise, and at a certain point, you just have to give in to the contract. You can't break the contract. If that says you need to get a Hellraiser movie out in 5 years, you need to get one out, whether that's like a good one that you believe in, or whether in the case of that one I'm referring to, which I forget the title of, really nightmare analogy here, if you just spend $100,000 on it and just say, there, we made a Hellraiser movie, we haven't marketed it, we put it straight to DVD, but we made one, so our contract is fulfilled.
Money, please.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like that. It's like, well, yeah, we just need to get this out. We need to make sure we don't break this contract. We need to make sure we fulfill what we've promised. And I feel like, the fact that Skull and Bones exists, where so many other games, even in Ubisoft's own catalog, have been cancelled, it's just very telling. I don't know if we'll ever see something like this again that isn't an official license like a Star Wars or a Tony Hawk or whatever, where like you really need to get one out, otherwise you lose your rights to it.
Something being in development for 9 years is that's a genuine human toll. And it's like, if you're part of the, because it's obviously, like I said, thousands of people worked on this thing, getting it over the finish line should be celebrated. If you're someone who worked on that game, like, props to you. Like, you got it finished. That's awesome. You did your work and everything else. And you can obviously be passionate about it. I think it is fascinating looking at an industry that starts to average those lengths of development, or at least that idea that something like Jason Schreier talked about over on Bloomberg, that if something goes into development now, the average is about a decade to get that upper echelon of game. And that's just unsustainable. It's the Sean Layden thing, who's an ex-PlayStation boss. You need to bring those numbers down somehow, or the project scope, or whatever it is, whatever's costing that much money.
Again, because like I said, Skull and Bones, like, there was no reality where that wasn't going to be $70 just because of the amount of money poured into it. And that to me, that's a shame for the developers. Obviously, they will believe in their product. They'll believe that it's worth $70, but would a smarter pricing model or even a free-to-play model have gotten more people on board, gotten more people to give it a try, like I mentioned? I think it would have, but like you said, because of the brass tacks of the business and the amount of time it's been in development and the amount of money spent on it, Ubisoft is, of course, going to sell it for $70 because they need to make all that money back. Otherwise, it's going to be even more of a write-off than it already is. But is that good for the game? And if we're going forward and we're seeing these 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 year development times normalized, like, how many games are going to be cannibalized by that price point because they just... they have, businessmen going, we need to make the money back. It needs to be this price point. We cannot budge on it.